The morning of the panel had a kind of calm anticipation that usually comes with high-profile political broadcasts. The segment, promoted by a major cable network as a dialogue on restoring civility in politics, was set to include a blend of lawmakers, former White House figures, and legal scholars. Jasmine Crockett, a rising Democratic congresswoman from Texas known for her sharp arguments and commanding presence, had accepted the invite with some hesitation. These panels often promised respectful debate but sometimes devolved into thinly veiled attacks. Still, she was prepared. Melania Trump joined remotely from her Florida home, a pristine setting behind her with an American flag and golden drapery framing the screen. Her tone, as usual, was measured, almost detached, but her words during the early minutes were largely uncontroversial. She spoke vaguely about the need for compassion and the return to dignity, carefully avoiding direct political shots. It was clear she was playing the diplomatic role she had cultivated since leaving the White House. Jasmine Crockett, on the other hand, didn't mince words. When the host raised the question of why political discourse had turned so ugly, Crockett pointed directly to how silence from those in power, particularly those with platforms like Melania's, had enabled harmful rhetoric to grow unchecked. She brought up examples, mentioning how graceful neutrality often masked complicity. There was a brief pause after her remarks, and then Melania spoke. She said softly, some women think being loud and aggressive makes them intelligent, but it often reflects poor upbringing and poor representation. She didn't look away from the screen. The air in the studio shifted. The host stammered for a transition, clearly unsure whether Melania had just crossed a line. The other panelists looked uncomfortable. Crockett didn't immediately react. Instead, she gave a small nod and glanced down to her notes, a reaction that told more than any counterpunch could have. The backlash was immediate online. Clips of Melania's comments circulated within minutes, posted with captions like "Did she just say that?" and subtle racism on live TV. The ambiguity of Melania's phrasing left room for plausible deniability, but it was clear to anyone watching who the remark was aimed at. Crockett, the only black woman on the panel, had just been addressed with coded language often used to diminish and stereotype women of color, especially those who speak with conviction and assertiveness in political arenas. By the end of the day, the network issued a generic statement praising diverse voices and standing for mutual respect. But Crockett's team wasn't satisfied. They quickly gathered clips, timestamps, and prior examples of Melania's carefully crafted language in similar public moments. It became clear that this wasn't an isolated comment, it was part of a pattern. A few hours after the broadcast, Crockett's office confirmed that legal counsel had been engaged, and that a civil lawsuit for defamation and reputational harm was being prepared. The lawsuit, filed in federal court the following morning, listed specific grievances tied to that live panel. It cited the national broadcast's reach, the racial undertones of Melania's remark, and the implied insult to Crockett's background, character, and public office. Her legal team emphasized that while political disagreement was expected, this particular comment crossed into personal attack, one that struck at identity and integrity, rather than policy or ideas. The shock of the moment lingered, not just because of what was said, but because of who said it. Melania Trump, who rarely participates in political discussions and is often described as reserved or even apolitical, had fired a direct shot under the veil of calm civility. Her tone hadn't changed, but her words had. It wasn't the volume that stung, it was the implication, delivered in front of millions. Crockett's decision not to respond in kind on air, but instead to take a strategic legal route, only intensified public interest in the story. By the time evening broadcasts picked it up, it had morphed into more than a panel controversy. It became a conversation about coded bias, the language of graceful racism, and how black women in politics are still forced to navigate both overt and covert attacks. As clips continued circulating, more and more people replayed the moment, realizing the weight behind that quiet insult. For many, the setting a panel about civility only made the impact sharper. The decision to file a $100 million lawsuit wasn't made in haste, and Jasmine Crockett's legal team approached it with deliberate calculation. The night after the controversial panel aired, Crockett's inner circle convened in a private conference room in Washington, D.C. The mood was focused, not reactionary. While the internet buzzed with takes and outrage, her team was already combing through footage, compiling transcripts, and gathering precedent. What Melania Trump had said wasn't just offensive, it had, in their view, crossed a legal line. The lawsuit would be built around three core components: defamation, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and reputational harm with racial overtones. Her lead attorney, Malcolm Jennings, a constitutional and civil rights lawyer with over 2 decades of courtroom experience, led the effort. Jennings had previously handled high-profile political cases involving slander, and he understood the fine line between protected speech and targeted personal attack. "We're not suing because of hurt feelings," he reportedly told the team. "We're suing because this was calculated, public, and damaging." The legal argument hinged on the fact that Melania Trump made her remark during a nationally televised broadcast with clear context and intent. While she didn't use Jasmine Crockett's name, the visual and conversational cues made the target unmistakable. The statement, "Some women think being loud and aggressive makes them intelligent," was framed immediately after Crockett's commentary. And the follow-up, "but it often reflects poor upbringing and poor representation," was interpreted as a direct attack on both her personal background and political legitimacy. Jennings and his team meticulously gathered past interviews, tweets, and public statements from Melania Trump to demonstrate a consistent pattern of subtle, coded language when speaking about outspoken women of color. This wasn't about one sentence, it was about a record. They argued that Melania had long cultivated an image of composure that allowed her to issue personal barbs beneath a polished surface, with minimal public scrutiny. The lawsuit framed the panel moment as a culmination of that pattern, weaponized in a way that inflicted real harm. Included in the legal filing were affidavits from political analysts and media experts, who testified to the remark's perceived racial connotation and its potential long-term damage to Crockett's credibility. They detailed how moments like these, when left unchallenged, eroded public trust in black female leaders by feeding into centuries-old stereotypes: loud, aggressive, unrefined. The suit didn't ask the court to police opinions. It asked them to consider the legal consequences of weaponizing those stereotypes in a public forum to discredit an elected official. Interestingly, Donald Trump's name did surface in the complaint, not as a defendant, but as part of the larger context. Crockett's legal team cited several examples in which Melania had echoed or subtly supported the former president's pattern of personal attacks, especially against women and minorities. One section of the filing highlighted how Melania, despite her brand of known engagement, had defended her husband's use of similarly divisive rhetoric in the past. This connection, they argued, established a shared playbook of rhetorical targeting masked as political commentary. The $100 million figure was not chosen at random. Jennings explained that the amount reflected both the magnitude of the broadcast's reach and the broader symbolic harm done to public officials like Crockett, who already navigate a hostile political landscape. The team calculated the damage, not just in terms of public perception, but also in potential lost endorsements, partnerships, and future political opportunities that might be affected by the smear. The figure sent a message. This wasn't just about one woman's reputation, it was about drawing a line. Critics of the lawsuit, especially those aligned with Trump's political orbit, immediately labeled it a publicity stunt. Conservative pundits accused Crockett of trying to silence opposition, but the legal documents were clear, precise, and anchored in established precedent. This wasn't about silencing it was about accountability. Crockett never made a public speech on the matter, never released a dramatic video statement. Her response was the lawsuit itself, a deliberate use of the system to challenge what many saw as a quiet but pointed insult. In legal circles, the move was seen as bold. Suing a former First Lady, especially one married to a current presidential candidate, was not something done lightly. But Jennings and Crockett weren't seeking tabloid headlines, they were seeking structural acknowledgement. They were demanding recognition that even subtle, polite slander can carry the same weight as overt insults, especially when directed at historically marginalized voices in politics. And through that legal lens, Crockett's team was determined to hold Melania Trump accountable in a way that couldn't be deflected with charm or silence. The response to Jasmine Crockett's lawsuit against Melania and Trump was immediate and wide-ranging, cutting across political lines, media circles, and advocacy communities. Within hours of the filing, the story dominated political coverage on both progressive and conservative platforms. For some, it was a bold stand against racially coded disrespect. For others, it was an overreach and attempt to criminalize free speech. The reactions, though varied, reflected the deep divides in how America processes race, gender, and power in politics. Among Democrats, especially within the Congressional Black Caucus, there was a notable wave of support. Several members issued statements underscoring the importance of challenging what they saw as covert racism disguised as civility. They praised Crockett's composure during the broadcast and her measured legal response. For them, this wasn't just about defending a colleague, it was about signaling that there would be consequences for those who engage in veiled personal attacks, particularly when aimed at black women in positions of influence. Some even referred to Crockett as a litigator in Congress and in culture, noting her background as a civil rights attorney before joining the House. Progressive media outlets rallied around her as well. MSNBC commentators described the lawsuit as a new kind of accountability, where silence was no longer an option and dignity could coexist with legal action. Op-eds popped up overnight, with headlines like "Melania Trump's words were louder than she realizes," and "Crockett's lawsuit isn't about ego, it's about respect." Several columnists pointed out how often black women are told to tone it down, only to be painted as aggressive or unfit when they speak up. For them, Melania's remarks weren't just careless, they were part of a cultural script that needed to be broken. Conservatives, however, had a starkly different take. Fox News anchors wasted no time in framing the lawsuit as a stunt meant to score political points during an election year. One commentator called it an outrageous attempt to sue someone for having an opinion. Others went further, accusing Crockett of leveraging race and gender to silence dissent. The Trump-aligned media ecosystem quickly closed ranks around Melania, portraying her as the victim of liberal overreaction. Donald Trump himself, when asked during a rally in Ohio, dismissed the lawsuit as total garbage and praised Melania for being classy and unbothered by the noise. Legal analysts across networks, however, offered more nuanced takes. While some questioned whether the lawsuit could meet the high bar for public defamation, given that both women are public figures, others acknowledged the strategic merit behind it. One legal scholar on CNN noted, "It's not just about winning in court, it's about drawing attention to how language operates in power structures." Another emphasized that even if the case didn't result in a financial judgment, it could open the door for broader discussions about political decorum and the boundaries of acceptable discourse. Outside the Beltway, civil rights organizations stepped into the conversation. The NAACP released a statement backing Crockett's decision to take legal action, citing it as a powerful stand against microaggressions that masquerade as respectability. Women's advocacy groups echoed similar sentiments. Many highlighted that the lawsuit was about more than personal offense. It was a response to the kinds of attacks that chip away at the public image of women of color in leadership, often without overt slurs or explicit language. In their view, Crockett had turned the legal system into a mirror, forcing America to look more closely at how power speaks. The public reaction was equally divided. Social media saw a surge of both support and mockery. Hashtags like #StandWithCrockett and #MELANIAGate trended alongside memes poking fun at the lawsuit's size and scope. Yet behind the humor, the core debate raged on. Should figures like Melania and Trump be held legally responsible for words that carry weight, even if delivered with a calm tone and ambiguous language? Interestingly, the lawsuit also sparked internal discussion within Republican circles. Some moderate voices questioned whether Melania's remarks were necessary or wise, especially given the broader scrutiny the Trump family is under. A few even privately acknowledged that the remark had racial undertones, though they stopped short of saying so publicly. It revealed a small, but telling in the otherwise solid wall of party defense. As the story unfolded, what became clear was that this wasn't just a political conflict. It was a cultural litmus test. The legal action taken by Jasmine Crockett may have named Melania and Trump, but the ripple effects extended far beyond the courtroom. It forced lawmakers, commentators, and citizens alike to re-examine how subtle words can carry loaded meanings and whether accountability should be reserved only for the loudest offenses. The lawsuit filed by Jasmine Crockett against Melania and Trump quickly became more than just a legal matter. It ignited a national conversation about race, representation, and the treatment of black women in American politics. At the heart of this controversy wasn't just the alleged insult on a live panel, but the deeper, more enduring reality that black women in leadership often navigate a uniquely hostile environment. Their assertiveness is misread as aggression, their confidence as arrogance, and their demand for respect as incivility. Crockett's response, rooted in the legal system rather than in social media outbursts, reframed that conversation in a powerful way. For many observers, the confrontation between Melania and Crockett symbolized a much broader pattern, how public perception frequently shifts depending on who is speaking and what they look like. Melania Trump, often seen as poised, soft-spoken, and composed, has been granted a level of leniency in the public eye that many black women have never experienced. Her remarks, made in a measured tone, were instantly labeled by some as just an opinion. But for Crockett and those who identified with her experience, the substance behind that opinion was weaponized. In political discourse, especially televised forums, black women face an added layer of scrutiny. Crockett's voice, unapologetically direct and firm, challenges norms that favor decorum over truth. When she speaks on the House floor or in committee hearings, she does so with clarity and urgency, style some praise, and others instantly dismiss as too much. That tension was on full display during the panel, where her commentary on political silence and complicity was met not with counter-argument, but with a passive-aggressive remark that cut at her identity. The remark about poor upbringing and poor representation struck a nerve because it echoed historical stereotypes. For centuries, black women have been painted as unrefined or incapable of leadership unless they mute their personalities and conform to white-centric standards of professionalism. Crockett, a former civil rights attorney, and now a rising political figure, represents a new era of unapologetic black leadership, where competence and passion coexist without the need to make others comfortable. Her lawsuit, though grounded in legal language, challenged those social expectations head-on. Asterisk, this broader context explains why civil rights leaders and scholars quickly linked the lawsuit to a larger fight. It wasn't just about defending Crockett, it was about creating space for black women in power to exist without constant policing of their tone, their volume, or their style. The idea that Melania Trump's comment could have lasting impact on Crockett's reputation, or be used in future political campaigns to discredit her, reflects a harsh truth. In public life, black women often have to fight twice as hard to be heard and 3 times as hard to be respected. Asterisk, even beyond politics. The incident drew attention from educators and media critics who pointed out how often coded language is used to undermine black excellence. Phrases like too loud, too emotional, or not dignified are rarely applied to white men or women who show passion or intensity. But when those traits are embodied by someone like Jasmine Crockett, they're recast as flaws. This disparity in perception feeds into real consequences, from how voters view candidates to how media frames their actions. Asterisk, Donald Trump, while not a direct participant in the broadcast or the lawsuit, loomed in the background of this debate. His history of inflammatory remarks about women and people of color has set a precedent within certain political circles, one where personal attacks are normalized, and public figures are encouraged to speak in veiled jabs that maintain deniability. Melania's comment, too many, seemed to follow that same script, by invoking character without naming names, and making judgments under the guise of etiquette. She perpetuated a style of discourse that targets without appearing overt. Asterisk, the cultural ripple effect of Crockett's lawsuit extended even into schools, workplaces, and community groups, where conversations emerged about how respect is defined and who gets to define it. The idea that standing up for oneself could be framed as uncivil or unprofessional is not new, but Crockett's approach offered a different model. She didn't raise her voice, she raised the stakes. And in doing so, she created a rare moment of institutional pushback against behavior that often escapes accountability. Asterisk, in the aftermath, many black women in public service voiced their own experiences of being subtly undermined or publicly They saw in Crockett's lawsuit not just a defense of her personal dignity, but a defense of their collective space in politics, law, and leadership. It wasn't just about a single comment on television, it was about challenging the idea that people like her should simply endure it. As the stories surrounding Jasmine Crockett's $100 million lawsuit against Melania Trump continues to unfold, it leaves behind more than a headline, it leaves behind a challenge to how society defines civility, respect, and accountability. The lawsuit itself may become a landmark legal case, or it may quietly resolve behind closed doors. But its real impact is already clear. It sparked an urgent dialogue about the nuanced ways in which language, identity, and power intersect in the public arena. Asterisk, Jasmine Crockett didn't respond with a viral rant or a fiery press conference. She responded with strategy, with legal precision, and with the weight of historical awareness behind her. Her decision to take legal action wasn't just about setting the record straight. It was about sending a message that black women in power do not have to absorb coded insults in silence, and that veiled attacks cloaked in politeness can be just as damaging as overt ones. In choosing the courtroom over the media cycle, she shifted the battleground to one that demands evidence, precedent, and accountability. Asterisk, Melania Trump, meanwhile, remains at the center of controversy. She likely didn't expect. Her comment, delivered in her signature calm demeanor, has now been dissected far beyond its original moment. Whether she intended to personally target Crockett or not may ultimately be decided by a judge, but the cultural implications of her words have already been judged in the court of public opinion. Her status as a former First Lady, with all the weight that carries, makes the impact of her words even more significant. And when words from that platform are interpreted as racially charged, the consequences resonate far beyond her own image. Asterisk, the broader public has been left to reckon with uncomfortable questions. Why are women like Crockett so often labeled combative when they advocate forcefully for their beliefs? Why is quiet condescension mistaken for dignity, while directness is mistaken for hostility? And perhaps most importantly, when does opinion cross the line into personal harm? Asterisk, in the end, this lawsuit won't just be about money or legal precedent. It has already become a flashpoint for examining the real costs of coded language in American discourse. It's about who gets to speak freely without backlash, and who must always be calculating, always defending, always bracing for impact. Asterisk, what Jasmine Crockett has done is remind the nation that civility does not mean silence, and that dignity does not come from turning the other cheek, it comes from standing firm, even when the world expects you to smile and swallow it. In doing so, she has reframed the narrative not just for herself, but for every woman who's been told to watch her tone, for every leader who's had to fight twice as hard to be heard, and for every person who believes that respect is not something that can be selectively distributed. It's either universal or it's just another tool of control.